Well, last week we started this series called The Table and saw that really a table was kind of at the epicenter of Jesus' ministry, that it was really a centerpiece for a lot of the meetings that he had, a lot of the interactions that he had, some significant ones, some meaningful moments. Some of the teaching that he did was around a table. Some of the pressing questions that he asked were around tables. Some of the stories that he told was around tables. And not only was it kind of the epicenter of his ministry, always these gatherings around a table, but we also saw that it was really a snapshot of the kingdom. That he begins to reveal what this kingdom would be like. And the things that he does around the table, the things that he says, the way that he interacts, who he interacts with, is this picture of what it's to be like in his kingdom and in the church. And it was some of the things that he would do around a table that would get him in trouble with the religious leaders. They didn't like the way that he operated when it came to the table, and especially with the eating and the meals and such. There were times where he would get in trouble regarding the issue of fasting, when the Pharisees and their disciples would fast, and how they would fast, and when they would fast, and what days. And Jesus and his disciples didn't conform to that. And it got them upset about the way they were at the table when the Pharisees didn't feel like they should be. And there were times when what Jesus and his disciples did around the table on the Sabbath really upset the Pharisees, because they were breaking some of the traditions and the way they thought that they should be behaving on the Sabbath. And there were some other traditions and rules that Jesus and his disciples would break, and we're going to look at those in a few minutes. But I think the thing that troubled the religious leaders the most about Jesus around the table is who he chose to have around his table. The kind of tables that he would sit at and the kind of people that he would bring to his table. Now, when I was in grade school, school just started for most of our students last week or two. When I was in grade school, there were a lot of things we had no say in. We didn't get to choose which room we were in. We didn't get to choose which teacher we had. And in those classrooms, we'd go to school. We'd see our name on the list. This is my room. This is my teacher. We didn't even get to choose where we sat, at which desk. We had our name tag. There was assigned seating. We didn't get to choose if we got to sit at the front of the room or the back of the room or close to the teacher's desk. That usually happened later after some behavioral issues. But we didn't get to choose that. We didn't get to choose who we could sit next to. Choice came in two arenas, recess and lunch. Those were where we got the free choice. At recess, we could play anywhere on the playground with whomever we wanted to play, whatever we wanted. And at lunch, we could sit with whomever we wanted to sit with at whatever table. And I would imagine there'd be a really interesting kind of lesson in sociological development that as children get older, starting at, say, kindergarten, first grade, as children get older, those distinctions of different groups and sectors and categories become more and more defined. The older they get, there's certain groups that sit together and certain groups that don't, and even to the point where certain groups look down on each other and don't want to have anything to do with each other. But they choose to sit in these groups. They choose to sit at these tables. Well, Jesus, likewise, chose to sit at some tables and chose to have some people sit at his table that weren't a part of the group that the Pharisees thought he should be sitting with. And it caused a great deal of trouble. In Luke chapter 15, we'll read these words when it says, "Now the tax collectors and sinners," and notice the sinners are in the quotation marks, "the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear him," to hear Jesus. "But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law," so now you got pastors and seminary professors here, all the religious guys, "they muttered." This word muttered isn't just like they're going, it means that they are complaining throughout the crowd. They're going around kind of stirring the pot, trying to kind of campaign against Jesus for what he's doing. They're muttering in the crowd, and they muttered, "This man welcomes," not tolerates, welcomes sinners and eats with them. They absolutely could not believe it. Not only does he just acknowledge them, he welcomes them. He brings them to his table, and he eats with them. Now, what we're going to see here in a few minutes is that this was such a big deal to the Pharisees. It was beyond just a group preference. It was beyond just, well, we don't hang out with those kind of people because they're not really in our group. It was beyond that. What Jesus is doing for the Pharisees in their thinking is a violation of epic proportions, because there was this entire system that they lived by. This entire system that when Jesus does this, he goes against the entire system and he breaks the whole system. The system has a word. It's a word that we don't use a whole lot in our culture, in our society. For most of us, we use it a little bit here and there. The word is kosher. Kosher. Now, real quick, without giving a lot of thought, just turn to someone and say, the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear the word kosher. Right now, go ahead. Don't think about it. Just tell them. Kosher. All right? Okay, now, stop. How many of you said Hebrew National? Okay, or Sinai 48, okay? How many of you said dill pickles? Oh, look at that. Okay, now this whole thing of kosher was a whole lot more than hot dogs and pickles. That's what we think of. When we think of kosher, we think it must be a style of pickle. It's not a style. It's not a flavor. You know, oh, look, they've got hot and spicy. Oh, and kosher. I'll try that one. There's something more to that. This whole idea of kosher for them, it was an entire system with laws and rules and traditions, tons of stuff to remember, things you could and couldn't do. So when it came to the whole eating thing around the table, there was this eating kosher, and when you were eating kosher, it was what was fit, it was what was proper, it was what was correct. And it was more than just what foods you did and didn't eat. That was a part of it. It was more than just what foods you ate together. That was part of it as well. It was more than preparation. It was your own preparation, and it was the people you were sitting around the table with. There were all these rules surrounding the table of whether or not it was kosher. Now, chances are, you had your own much smaller version of kosher around the table that you grew up with. There were probably things that were acceptable, things that were expected, things that were prohibited, and maybe there were things of hygiene, things of manner, maybe it was things of etiquette. Maybe what was part of the kosher code around your house is that you washed your hands before you came to the table. Maybe it's that you put the napkin on your lap before you start eating. Maybe it was that you used the napkin and not your sleeve at your house. It may have been those kinds. It may have been a thing of manners that you would say, hey, please pass the whatever instead of saying spuds now. You know, I mean, you use manners. Or may I please be excused? Or take your plate over to the sink. There may have been some of these things. There may have been some of the rules of how you operate around the table. Don't talk with your mouth full. Don't chew with your mouth open. Don't eat directly out of the bowl. Those kind of things. There may have been some other ones. There's no slurping, no burping, and no pulling of fingers around the table. We just don't do that. There was one in our house that there was no singing at the table, yet there were times throughout the year that we would gather around the table and sing the doxology. Hypocrisy my parents had. All right, so there's all of these things. Well, chances are, if we surveyed this room, that form of kosher code in your home may have been different from home to home. Maybe you were raised in a house where, you know, people just kind of came and go and no one sat, no one asked to be excused, and no one used napkins. That's what sleeves were created for. Maybe that was yours. When it came to this kosher code for the Jewish community, it was not subjective. It wasn't different from house to house. And if you broke it, it wasn't just bad manners. It wasn't just being rude. They took this very, very seriously. And if you broke the kosher code, in their mind, you became unclean in the eyes of Yahweh. It was that serious around the table. And there were all kinds of issues, all kinds of different aspects of this, what it means to be kosher. Some of them came from Leviticus. Some of them came from Deuteronomy. Many of them came over the years as man-made traditions from the elders, but they weren't biblical. But it had become this enormous list of stuff, and it covered just, volumes about what you could and couldn't eat, and some of this you can find in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. As far as meat was concerned, if an animal had cloven hooves and chewed the cud, you could eat that animal. If it did not have cloven hooves and chew the cud, you could not. So there was some prohibitions. Some of these you've heard of. They could not and will not eat pork. That's why when you're talking about the Hebrew National and the Sinai 48 and the hot dogs, those hot dogs are kosher because they have no pork in them at all. They couldn't eat pork. They couldn't eat rabbits. They couldn't eat camels. I don't know, no hump roast for you. All right. They couldn't eat rock badgers, though I couldn't find anything in the Bible about honey badgers. All right, so couldn't eat rock badgers. They couldn't eat eagles or scavenger birds for you loggers. They could not eat owls. They couldn't eat insects or any bugs that creeped along the ground. However, there was a little caveat given. If a bug was born inside of a piece of fruit and you ate it, you were not unkosher because that bug had technically never creeped along the ground. So there was a little bit of a deal. Now, when it came to seafood, it was a real bummer for them because the law would state that they couldn't eat any fish or seafood unless it had fins and scales. So on the fish side of things, no catfish, all right? No sturgeon, no eels for sushi lovers, no sharks. And There was no crab, no lobster, no clams, no oysters, no mussels. Seafood bisque just went out the window. Had none of that. And they weren't allowed to consume the blood of an animal. So if you had a really rare steak, you know, some of the ones that kind of bleed on your plate, wouldn't happen. They had very strict procedures about how to slaughter an animal, how to bleed an animal out, and then how to draw all remaining blood out of the meat so that it would be kosher. They had specific rules about not mixing in your meals milk products, dairy products, and meat products. You could eat meat products or you could eat dairy products, but not at the same meal. You could not do that. Cheeseburger was unheard of, still unheard of. You cannot do that. And if you had a plate or utensils that had meat, had been used for preparing meat or eating meat, you could not use those plates or pots or silverware for dairy products. They had to be separate. They had to be cleaned separately. And to this day, if Jewish people use a dishwasher, and in the dishwasher they have a pot that was used for boiling meat or such, and they run it through the dishwasher, they must run an empty cycle through the dishwasher to clean the dishwasher before they wash anything with dairy products. Very strict rules on this. And the preparation of all of this. This last summer, I went out and toured the facility of the Northwest Berry Co-op. Rolf Haugen took me out there during the time when they were processing raspberries and blueberries. So I was going around just seeing how they do all this processing. And he said, we have this deal that if we want to sell our product, we have to be certified kosher. Well, that's interesting. I said, what does that take? And he said, well, the rabbi comes out and he walks around our plant and then he gives us his seal of approval and then it's kosher certified and then he sends us a bill for $1,800. And he said, Bob, you ought to start blessing, businesses. And so I did. I blessed the Raspberry Co-op and then sent him a bill for $1,800. Didn't work. But the interesting thing is that it's not just that part of it. Every part along the way has to be certified kosher. So they will process these raspberries, and much of the raspberries and the puree, they'll send over to Eastern Washington to Treetop to make juice and different things. The way they do that is they send them in large tanker trucks from LTI. The tanker trucks must be certified kosher, so the rabbi goes to LTI, certifies the trucks as kosher, sends them a bill for $1,800. When they get over to the other side of the state, Treetop, the processing plant there, has to be certified as kosher. It's a great deal. All the way along, there's all of this to make sure it's kosher, because anything that's kosher, if anywhere along the way it touches something that is deemed unclean or not kosher, the whole thing's thrown out. It's no longer clean anymore. Not only is it the food and the preparation and what you can and can't eat, what you can't eat with, and all this stuff, part of the kosher code was their own preparation to be ceremonially clean. This wasn't so much about hygiene as it was about keeping rules. And part of that, some of us were raised, you wash your hands before you go to the table. This was a big deal for them, but it wasn't about having hands that are free from dirt. They would wash their hands before every meal and between every course of the meal. And this is what it says about washing their hands. First, the hands were held with fingertips up. Water was poured over and had to run at least down to the wrist. The minimum amount of water that could be used is referred to as 1/4 of a log, which is equal to 1.5 eggshells full of water. While the hands were still wet, each hand had to be cleansed with the fist of the other. Next, the hands had to be held with the fingertips down and had to have the same amount of water poured over them starting from the wrist. This really had nothing to do with washing germs off or anything like that. It had to do with these traditions that had been set up over the years. So you can understand why there was all of this controversy when Jesus was invited to a Pharisee's house and he sat and reclined at the table without washing his hands. They were like, what are you talking about? They would all be over there with the 1.5 eggshells doing all this washing deal. And, a little side note, when Jesus turned the water into wine, there were large pitchers of water. That was water used for ceremonial cleansing. It wasn't used for anything else. Nothing else would mix with it. It was purely for that. So Jesus, he says, you know what? This is man-made tradition, and I don't need to do it. And it was an uproar. He's breaking these kosher laws, this code. Or how about this one with his disciples? The Pharisees and some of the teachers of the law who had come from Jerusalem gathered around Jesus and saw some of his disciples eating food with hands that were unclean, that is, unwashed. They hadn't gone through the process. They didn't do the cleansing. The Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they give their hands a ceremonial washing, holding to the tradition of the elders. When they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash. And they observe many, and I'm telling you, if I gave you all of the kosher laws, we would be here for hours today. They observed many other traditions, such as the washing of cups, pitchers, and kettles. So the Pharisees and teachers of the law asked Jesus, hey, why don't your disciples live according to the tradition of the elders instead of eating their food with unclean hands? See, they were breaking this kosher code. And there was this separation of people. The people who lived according to the kosher laws and the rules and the traditions, the code, were referred to as people of the law. And those who broke it, even on the smallest point, were considered people of the land. And people of the law would have nothing to do with people of the land. In fact, there's rabbinical writings that talk about how the people of the law, people who followed the traditions, people who kept the kosher code, were not to in any way associate with people of the land. Definitely don't marry them. Don't trust them. Don't loan them any money. As far as it is possible with you, do not do any business with them. Never be a guest in their home, and never have them as a guest in your home. When you begin to understand how huge of a deal this was to them, then you begin to see, okay, yeah, Jesus was raising some eyebrows and ruffling some feathers with the way he operated around the table. Because there's these two groups of people. Here's one example. It says, while he was in Bethany, reclining at the table. So he's at the dinner table. That's the whole reclining thing, is at the table where they eat. Reclining at the table in the home of a man known as Simon the leper. Okay, just use your logic here. If he's got a nickname like this, Simon was probably okay, all right. So it's either that or a vampire slayer. But it was Simon the leper here, okay? If you're familiar with Old Testament laws, leprosy would deem you unclean as well. He's in the home of this guy who's got the name Simon the leper, which is wrong. This is an unclean person. He's not kosher. He's a person of the land. And it gets worse. A woman. Oh, there goes the party. A woman shows up. Now you got to understand, for a rabbi, you would never sit down with a woman at the table. You just wouldn't do that. That would not be. So now he's at the table with a leper, and a woman comes. And later, you know, if you know the story, she actually breaks this jar of expensive perfume and touches him. This is crazy. This is beyond what is okay. This is not okay. This is breaking the kosher code. When I was in grade school, I went to Lincoln Elementary School in Vancouver, Washington. There was this highly contagious infection. It was not like fatal, but it was dreaded, this highly contagious infection. And I don't know the medical term. We just referred to it as cooties. I don't know if you've ever had that, but it was just, and it's not airborne, it's more by contact. There's only one thing worse than cooties: girl germs. Girl germs trump cooties anytime. The only redeeming factor with the girl germs, though, is there was a remedy to girl germs. And that was if you had somehow contracted girl germs by contact, it wasn't airborne, by contact, you could go to a friend and touch him and say, "Girl germs, no returns," and then you were ceremonially clean, and he had to deal with the issue. It's just kind of the way it worked, which was very difficult when it came to our PE, and we had to do Red Rover, and we're all holding hands, and you're kind of doing that pinky thing with the girl, but that means that's a weak link, and they're going to send, Jimmy right over, and he knows right where he's going, so break right through that, no problem. And so, or what was even worse was when they did the whole square dancing unit. Oh, man. I mean, you don't want to do-si-do with your bro, but it's a whole lot better than her. I mean, I don't want to touch her. I'll get her girl. And we even had this imaginary spray. Psh, we kind of, this disinfectant stuff. The whole thing with that is contact equals contamination. You touch a girl, you're contaminated. You've got girl germs. You've got cooties. You've got this. You contact them, you are contaminated. You take that to the nth degree. And that was the thinking of the Pharisees with these people of the land. You contact them. You have any connection with them at all, you are contaminated. You are unclean. You're not kosher. Now, with that as backdrop, we're going to look at a story where Jesus is at a table. A pretty familiar story for some of you. It's found in Matthew chapter 9. If you have your Bible, you can turn to Matthew chapter 9. What's kind of interesting about this story in the version that we're going to read it, it's written by this guy who writes the book of Matthew. You know what his name is? Matthew. Okay, I know. Real original on the titles. It's like if I ever write a book, it's just going to be called Bob. I don't know. But he writes this book called Matthew. And in his book, which is his account of Jesus' life and ministry, he tells his own story. He weaves it right in. But he does it in third person. He doesn't say, well, I was sitting here and then Jesus said to me. He pulls himself out of the story as if he's looking down, and in the third person, he writes about his first encounter with Jesus. Now, some of you know Matthew has a name that's interchangeable with Levi, and he had this occupation that did not cause him to be warmly embraced by most of the people around him. So we read in Matthew chapter 9, verse 9, as Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. That was a hated profession because he had sold out. He was working for Rome, and they gave him freedom to charge whatever he could get out of these people. As long as he sent some of it to Rome, he could keep the rest. He had gotten wealthy on all of his countrymen, and they all hated him for it. So he's at his tax collector's booth. Jesus sees him and says, "Follow me," he told him. And Matthew got up and followed him. Now, on two fronts, for just the rank and file Jewish person, they're like, Jesus, not him. You don't want him on your team. We don't like him. He has ripped all of us off. And then on a religious level, the Pharisees would be saying, Jesus, no way. You do know who you're talking about right here. We are people of the law. We don't associate. We avoid contact at all costs with people like him. We don't do any business dealings with them. We never have them in our house. No. It gets worse. Verse 10. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house. No. You can't be having dinner at Matthew's house. Matthew is this people of the land. He's unkosher. He's unclean. He's dishonest. He's a thief. He's all of this. And Jesus, you're having dinner with him? Do you know what that does to you? But it gets even worse. Because Matthew's theme song is, I've got friends in low places. And all of his buddies show up too. It says this, many, not a couple. We're talking about a herd. It's a convention. Many tax collectors and sinners, their buddies, their friends, their homies, their peeps, their cohort, they're all here. Many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. This just can't be. That Jesus and his followers are hanging out with this big group of people of the land. It goes on. And when the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples. When they ask his disciples this, I don't think they're looking for information. I don't think they're seeking to understand. I think there's something else going on here. They asked his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? And as we'll see in just a second, they said this loud enough that this wasn't just a question. This was a put down, this was a statement. This is the girl who is a junior in high school who's angry because the boy who's a senior that she really likes asked the girl who's a freshman to the homecoming dance. And as they're sitting together, she's so angry and she just asked this question. What does he see in her anyway? She really doesn't want to know. She doesn't want him to say, well, you know, she has a real innocent heart and a sweet spirit and she's prettier than you. I mean, she doesn't want to know any of that. The reason she said that is because she wants to shoot some arrows at him and her. It's a mean girl thing. I'm asking this question out loud so you can accidentally hear it, but it's not because I want the answers, because I'm saying something about you and your relationship. Same thing, he asked his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? This was obviously done loud enough that everybody could hear. Jesus could hear it. Matthew could hear it. All of his friends could hear it. So, on hearing this, because it wasn't a secret, Jesus said, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I think this is one of those tense moments when the Pharisees are like, this always happens. He always does this. And the disciples are kind of like, and all the tax collectors are going, who's sick? Well, someone's sick? They don't have a clue. And there's this tense moment, and Jesus says to them, listen, I'm giving you the answer to the question you really don't want to hear the answer to. And then he goes on, and he pulls the gloves off. But he says to them, but go and learn what this means. Now remember, these guys are experts in the law. They know the Torah, they know the laws and the prophets, they know all of it better than anybody. He said, I need you to go study the Word of God here. I need you to go study the Scripture. But go and learn what this means. And what he says here, this little phrase, is good on the surface, but there's a whole lot more underneath it that I think he's saying. He says, go figure out what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. That's a great statement to go and figure out what that means, because Jesus is showing mercy to these people, and these Pharisees have lived a life of sacrifice and self-discipline. But there's something else here, something far deeper here. Because when Jesus says, go figure out what this means, he's quoting Hosea 6:6, and these guys knew it. They knew that he's quoting one of the Old Testament prophets. And I think when he does that, he's not just saying figure out what this whole mercy sacrifice thing is about. He says, think back. You know the story of Hosea. You know the story of Hosea and Gomer, his wife. You know how unfaithful she was. And you know that the whole story was that he brought her back to his table, to his home, to his life, even though she had been unfaithful, even though she had broken the commandments, even though she was unworthy. You know this story. And the whole reason God had Hosea do that is because he said, this is my heart. Don't you see the heart of God that has been recorded since way back from the prophets? You know this story. God has always had a heart for those who are far from him. He's always been gracious. He's always been loving. And maybe underneath even that, Jesus is saying, and by the way, you guys are the Gomers here today. You're the ones that are far from God. Oh, yeah, you're disciplined. Yeah, you do all your little rituals and all your rules and all your traditions and all this sacrifice. But you're so far from God. He goes on. 4, here's why. You ask me why, I'm telling you why. I'm going to give you the answer to your question. For I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. This word call could also be translated invite, if you wanted to. He said, I didn't come here to invite those of you who are so self-righteous, who don't need any forgiveness, who don't need any grace, who've got it all taken care of. I didn't come to invite you to my table because you don't seem to need my table. The whole reason I even came was to invite these people to my table. And you think about sitting at a table. And I'm sure there's many ways you can go about sitting at a table, but if you're in a cafeteria or something, you have a tray of food, and you're looking for a place to sit. There's like 3 different ways this thing can happen. Now, you can go to a table, and maybe there's a bunch of people there, and there's a seat there, and you can ask this question: is this seat taken? It's a simple yes or no. And it's all about, is there access, is there room here for me? And the people at the table can say, no, it's not taken. And you can sit there at that table because there is room. They may never talk to you the whole time. They may never interact with you. You just have a spot at the table. Or you could come up with your tray and you can ask this question: hey, can I join you? Well, that's different than is there room. Now it's saying, can I be included? Can I join you? Not just a spot, but can I be a part of this? And they could even respond, yeah, I mean, what are we going to say? He's the pastor. Go ahead. All right. So, but the best way is you're walking around with a tray, looking around, and someone across the room says, hey, come over here. Come sit at our table. We want you to sit at our table. That's a totally different level. It's not just, is there room? It's not just, can I weasel my way into this group? It's, we want you. We're inviting you. We desperately want you at our table. And Jesus says, that's what I am doing. I'm saying, hey, you guys, you're far from God. Come to my table so you can learn about love and grace and life. I want you at my table. 6 or 7 years ago, our house was being built, and I'd go out there almost on a daily basis. I wanted to get to know the subs and stuff and just kind of see the progress that was taking place. And one of the subcontractors was coming in, and I hadn't met him yet, and the guy who was general in it said, hey, this guy's great. He'll do great work for you. I think he's an atheist, though. I said, okay. So I went out, and I met him, and just on a personal level, we just connected. I mean, we had similar sense of humor, kind of that Dumb and Dumber humor, and we just kind of connected, and we joked and laughed, and it was just real easy conversation, real comfortable. And and then he found out that I had motorcycles, so I showed him those, and he had motorcycles. They had high-end motorcycles, I think Ducati and a Buell and some different things. And so we would talk motorcycles. And as he and his company were doing this work on my house, I would go out and see him, and we would talk motorcycles. And the relationship just developed very quickly at a comfortable level where we could just kind of be just honest. And so, I mean, early on, he said, I understand you're a pastor. I said, yeah, I understand you're an atheist. Yeah, okay. So we had great conversations. So just real honest right up front. And he would joke. He said, boy, if you're going to save me, you got your work cut out for you and all this stuff. And he came to church once, maybe twice. I know he came on a Christmas Eve and then maybe one other time with his kids. So his work was done, and away he went, and our paths just didn't cross. Well, then there was this day, and he said, hey, Bob, I'll meet you at the house. I've got something for you. And I'm thinking, I paid my bill. And don't be disturbed here. I'm not. He said, I've got something for you. He said, I saw this, and I thought of you. And he bought me this T-shirt. Now, you may not be able to see it, but it's got a nun smoking a cigarette riding a motorcycle. And on the top, it says, wherever there is sin, that's where I must go. I said, and you thought of me? And he said, yeah. I said, I can't wear that T-shirt. And he said, but isn't that what Jesus was all about? I'm like, I got an atheist preaching to me at my own house about how Jesus operates. And I'm like, yeah, thanks for the Christian T-shirt. I never thought of it that way, but absolutely right. See, Jesus said, this is why I came. Because there are people who need to be at the table. And I bring them here. There's kind of a parallel story. I love this. I'll try and do this quickly. In the Old Testament, King Saul had a son named Jonathan. Jonathan had a best friend named David, okay? All right. Jonathan also had a son. You don't hear a whole lot about him. So King Saul is a king of Israel. In most people's mind, Jonathan is the heir apparent. And in a battle, King Saul and his son, Prince Jonathan, both get killed on the very same day. And it's a horrible deal. And in all of this, there is David, who becomes the new king of Israel. And what is customary is that when a new king comes into power, he will destroy any relative of the past king, so there's no chance of insubordination, some uprising, getting people, all that. He would just naturally, if there's a change of dynasty or a change of regime, they would kill all the relatives. So Jonathan's son is still alive and is afraid that his life is going to be taken, and those around him are afraid. And so we read this in 2 Samuel chapter 4. Jonathan, son of Saul, had a son who was lame in both feet. We'll see why, but in this day and age, that was not a good thing. That was seen as an omen. It was seen as a curse from God. They didn't have the American Disability Act. If you were physically disabled, you were an outcast. You probably couldn't own property or have a job. It was a horrible thing. He was lame in both feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel, that his dad and grandfather had been killed. His nurse picked him up and fled. But as she hurried to leave, he fell and became crippled. His name was Mephibosheth. So as they're trying to leave, somehow he falls, probably breaks both ankles or both legs. They're never set right, and so he's never able to walk again for the rest of his life. You think about all the strikes that are against this kid. They take him. He's 5 years old. His dad just got killed. His grandfather just killed. He was set to be in royalty, to be on the throne. Now he's a fugitive. He's an exile. And they move him off to this place way out in the wilderness. And he's not only does he lose his father and his grandfather, now he's got this curse upon his life, this physical infirmity that's going to affect him for the rest of his life in more than just physical ways. All of that stuff. Plus, they move him to this little area called Lodabar, this wasteland. Translated into English, it's Ellensburg. It's out in the middle of nowhere. It's desolate. It's a horrible place to be. He's out in Lodabar. On top of all that, he's got to grow up with a name like Mephibosheth. You can never find the little license plate for the back of your bike when your name is Mephibosheth. He's got all of this going against him. Years later, David is the king, and he's thinking back on his life, and he's thinking about the blessings of God, and he's thinking about his best friend Jonathan and all those days, and what a great guy. And out of the blue one day, he just says, is there anyone still alive in Jonathan's family? Well, there's this servant named Ziba who actually worked for Jonathan. And they called Ziba in and said, Ziba, is there any of Jonathan's relatives still alive? And he says, well, Jonathan had a son. I can imagine David going, oh, that's right. I mean, how can your best friend have a son and you not know about it? I'm sure David knew about it. He had just forgotten. That's right. Jonathan had a son. He loved little Rsvp. Is he still alive? And he says, yeah, he's living in Lodabar. He says, well, then go get him. Now you can imagine, this may have been 20-some years later, when the king's men come into Lodabar, and they say, Mephibosheth, the king wants to see you. The dread that comes upon him, not only has he had to live a cursed life, now he's going to lose what little life he has. And so he goes to Jerusalem, and this is what it says. Don't be afraid, David said to him, for I will surely show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you, this is incredibly generous, I will restore to you all the land that belonged to your grandfather. That's Saul, King Saul, all that he owned. There's a chance Mephibosheth never owned an acre in his life, and now he gets all of this king's inheritance, all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will always eat at my table. You're not living out there anymore. And he is so filled with this life that has just been a low self-image. He says, and this is his quote, why would you give any mind to, and here's what he says about himself, a dead dog like me. I mean, the kind of life he's had to live where he refers to himself as, I am no better than roadkill. What would you have any of that to do with me? David says, so Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of the king's sons. He says, no. You're in my family now. You're at my table now. You're always going to be here. You're never going to be wanting. You're never going back there. You're right here. Verse 13, and Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem because he always ate at the king's table, and he was crippled in both feet. You know what I love about that story? That's my story. And that's your story. Because we have all fallen. And we have all messed up our lives. And spiritually, on our own, we are crippled and no better than a dead dog. Yet the King loves us so much, he invites us to his table as his sons and daughters and gives us a king's inheritance. What a story. And I wonder, when Jesus is sitting there at Matthew's house with all of these people, I wonder if this story came to his mind as well. I wonder if he thought, Hosea showed incredible grace to Gomer. And David showed unbelievable grace and generosity to Mephibosheth. And that's why I'm here, to invite to my table those who are so unworthy and to be a part of this. And it's our story because he continues to invite to his table. I wonder if that's the story he had in mind when, again, he's talking to the Pharisees in Luke 14, and he says, but when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. Yeah, physically, but what about those who are poor in spirit? Remember, he would say, blessed are the poor in spirit. Or the crippled or the lame, those who have messed up their lives, those who can't even take a step, the blind who can't even see. So don't you understand? I've come to invite those to my table. I know it's not kosher, but I don't care. There's a song, older song. For some of you, I apologize in advance, by Toby Keith. And the name of that song is, I Love This Bar. Nervous laughter. And the lyrics go like this. We got winners and we got losers, chain smokers and boozers. And we got yuppies, we got bikers, we got thirsty hitchhikers. And the girls next door dress up like movie stars. I love this bar. Now, we got cowboys, and we got truckers, broken-hearted fools and suckers, and we got hustlers, and we got fighters, early birds and all-nighters. And the veterans talk about their battle scars. I love this bar. I've seen short skirts, and we got high techs, blue-collar boys and rednecks, and we got lovers, lots of lookers, and I've even seen dancing girls and hookers. And we like to drink our beer from a mason jar. I love this bar. When I read Matthew chapter 9, and when I read through the New Testament, I get this sense that if Jesus were planting a local church in America today, that he would open up the doors and invite absolutely everybody. And I think maybe he would have as their church's theme song a version of Toby Keith's song. We got winners and we got losers, chain smokers and boozers, and we got yuppies and we got bikers, we got thirsty hitchhikers. We all go fish for men and not just perch. I love this church. And we got cowboys and we got truckers, broken-hearted fools and suckers. We got hustlers and we got fighters, early birds and all-nighters. And the irreligious aren't left in the lurch. I love this church. And I've seen short skirts. And we got high techs, blue-collar boys and rednecks. And we got lovers, lots of lookers. And I've even seen dancing girls and hookers. And like Jesus, we've come to seek for and to search. I love this church. Because I believe that Jesus' arms of acceptance and invitation to his table would be so wide open for anybody and everybody. He would be full of grace, and I don't think he would for 1 second ever lower the bar or water down the gospel, because he's full of grace and truth. And he would highly proclaim this new kingdom and the need for forgiveness and grace and the life that God has called us to, but everybody would be invited to his table. See, it's really clear when you read this out of Matthew 9 and throughout the Gospels, at the table of Jesus, the most unlikely are welcome. The most unlikely are welcome. And remember, he said, my table is a snapshot of the kingdom. My table is a snapshot of the church. The way I operated around the table is the way I want my people to operate in this world. And what that means is for us, that we would be actively throwing open our arms and inviting everyone that we can find to the table to experience grace and life. You know, I talked to a guy this week, and he just told me about his spiritual journey. And it was interesting, on the high points of this journey that took him from a home where they didn't go to church. As a kid, someone invited him to go to Sunday school, and he went. As a teenager, someone invited him to go to a Bible study, and he went. Someone invited him to go to a youth group, and he went. And God has used this individual to impact literally hundreds, and I mean thousands of lives. But it was because someone was willing to invite. You know, there was a day in this church where this whole concept gripped us so much. People would carry around in their Bibles these little lists, what we refer to as heaven's most wanted lists, with names on it. People that they had committed to praying for every single day, to sharing with, to inviting to church, to do everything they could. And I remember people would come up to me and say, Pastor Bob, one of my heaven's most wanted lists is here. They're so excited. And then at times, like we're going to do on Wednesday night, when someone would get baptized and they say, with tears in their eyes, she was on my heaven's most wanted list. He's been a part of my heaven's most wanted list for 4 years. And we were gripped by that. People would pray, people would fast, people would say, God, please, they would beg for the souls of their friends. Oh, that we would be gripped with the heart of Jesus and that this would be the table of Jesus. And when he would look down on us, he would say, I love that church. Because they invite people to the table. And here's what I want you to do. Your last blanks, if you're taking notes there, just write down there, my guest, and then there's this blank line. Because my prayer is that we would again be gripped with this heart of Jesus that would be all about inviting more and more people to the table. I'm going to share on Wednesday night some of the opportunities that we have, some of the stuff we're real excited about, we're working on and praying about. But I'm asking you, would you follow the example of Jesus, praying for those who are not at the table, sharing with, and inviting to experience life. Jesus, I pray that as a church, as individuals in your church, that we would reflect you around a table with Matthew, all his friends, and all their buddies. And that you would look at this church with all the people, no matter where they are in their spiritual journey, and say, I love this church. I pray this in your name. Amen.